Good morning. So I've been gone a while and got back just a couple of days ago and I'm battling a nasty head cold. Bear with me. My tone of my voice, my eyes, my bloodshot eyes. I've been blowing my nose, so I shouldn't have any sniffles or anything. All right. I received a couple of comments while I was gone. One is I've had an individual ask if I could do a tutorial on the TSA for baseline basketball, John Turnbull's basketball game. So I wrote John this morning, and he actually has done a tutorial on his YouTube channel for the TSA. He's going to send me a link, and then I will send that link to the individual who asked me to do that tutorial so he can watch the game designer do that. I don't want to do the tutorial because I haven't, number one, I haven't looked at the new rules. I've been gone a while and I don't want to do it wrong. So it's best to get that data from the man who invented the game. So I'll put a link to John's tutorial when I get the link from John. Okay, so that's business part one. Second part of business is I had a longtime subscriber ask me about my offensive line. Why don't I have offensive line ratings in my football game? And this is kind of a reality that I've had for a long time. Even growing up playing status pro football, which had individual offensive lineman ratings for both run blocking and pass blocking. Stratomatic, who rates offensive linemen individually. Second season football. I think Fourth Street football. Any game that uses individual players and finds a way to rate them individually for run blocking, pass blocking, whatever, inside blocking, I don't know, whatever depth the games go to. And then there are some games I'm sure that rate them as a unit, offensive line, unit, modifier, or something. And so first I want to talk about why I don't, because there are no official offensive line stats. There's a couple of companies that derive offensive line production or and even try to provide you some indication of what offensive lineman quality is. The problem with that is it's not official, right? How are they correlating that data? What are they constituting as a win at the line of scrimmage? What are they constituting as a sack against the player? The NFL has never done it, not officially, and therefore, when a when a when you're rating the 1972 Miami Dolphin offensive line, Stratomatic for per se is rating those offensive linemen. It has to be based on team performance. It must be, and then based maybe on whether they made the Pro Bowl, whether they were all pros, whether they were consensus, reputation, right? And so this is the problem, is I think much of that in my history of a tabletop gamer as a kid growing up playing status pro football, mostly status pro football, where they had individual ratings. I didn't disagree with most of it, but I only knew what I knew from reading magazines and watching football as a teenager. When I saw Howie Long's -4.3, I didn't disagree with it. I'd watched Howie Long, and he led the Raiders in sacks, and he was double teamed almost all the time. So I can make sense of that. You say, oh, -4.3. Of course, he's the anchor. He's the best defensive lineman the Raiders have. And you see the left tackle Art Shell or whoever it was at center, Dave Dolby, and I knew as a Raider fan, and I knew what the world said about these guys. These guys are good. These guys were Pro Bowlers. These guys are, and so I didn't question a lot, but I didn't know who the right tackle was of the Atlanta Falcons outside of Status Pro. And if the right tackle of Status Pro was rated a +3.3, I went, wow, this guy must be great. Had no clue really who he was because as a kid, you're not getting a lot watch the Atlanta Falcons much. The point is, as I grew up and started paying attention to statistics and realizing the NFL has never in its history recorded offensive line numbers except games started and games played. That's it. I think it was very much a consensus what coaches would say about their players. Obviously, you could look and see, wow, when you watch a game, you can see that the left side of the Raiders you couldn't get to Ken Stabler from the left side. It was difficult. And the Raiders ran to the left. And when they ran well, they ran to the left. So you could kind of, as a fan, just say, dude, that left side of that Raider line is something special from the center out left, but it's all subjective, right? So I want to remind people football is not baseball. It's not basketball. So in my opinion, there are two team sports that are, it's difficult to not say are pure. Baseball, in my opinion, is pure sport in the sense that baseball tracks every individual player's impact upon the game because it's easy to do. Baseball, it's fundamentally so sound that we know exactly how many errors a player made. We know exactly how many putouts a player made. We know exactly, if you understand what I'm saying, it's there is no wondering, what a batter did at the plate. You know exactly how many doubles he hit, singles, walks, how many hits he took, how many walks he took. You know how well a pitcher pitches. All that data is damn near been around since baseball started to some degree, right? Now we have all this new analytic data that is given some insight to offensive linemen and offensive line production. Still, none of it is official. And the reason for that is I don't think they can honestly. Football is too much. It's difficult to say of Marcus Allen's 1,759 yards rushing in 1985, his MVP year. How much of that was him? How much of that was the offensive line? Well, I would argue it takes two to tango, but how do we know that? When the Raiders are sacked 52 times, how much of that was on, Mark Wilson's holding the ball too long or on their offensive line failing to protect him, right? So this is a problem. So when I rate my teams, whether I'm rating historical teams, then I use their yards rushing, I use their rushing average, I use their rush touchdowns, I use their sack while trying to pass or sack ratings. If I'm when I'm grading quarterbacks, receivers, and running backs, and I include that rating for my running backs as representation of the offensive line as well. So I have a version of Big Country Football that had offensive line ratings, and I went through and rated offensive linemen for 1985 or whatever season I did at the time, and it worked. But there's only 20 results on that chart. I've got three defensive positions I want to account for, and again that's based on team numbers, not individual numbers, right? So that I rate positions, I don't rate individuals. So if you see running back, that's the whole backfield, right? So yes, a team like Dallas may get a +2 because of Tony Dorsett. Maybe the other backs weren't very good, but Tony Dorsett killed it. Well, that also includes what the value of their offensive line would be. But when I did make OL ratings, I tried to have them impact the game in a particular way. And it just was clumsy and it was not as smooth a game and it was kind of clumsy. They were rated from 0 to +2, and they just had to be greater than the position they faced. So I would say OL greater than DL, very much something like second season would do, right? Is my OL greater than the DL? Well, if the DL, an offensive lineman could not be rated in a negative in my original BCF, so they would be a 0, 1, or a 2. 2 meant they could never be beaten, right? Because they had to be greater than. So if they were a 2, no DL could beat that OL. So that would be the best OL in football, and it would allow that rating to stay there and be read across the board. And it worked, but it was also difficult, I think, rule wise to explain it in the rules. How do you read that, right? I could, and I did, but what ended up happening is I ended up saying this is redundant because I can rate the backs, including the quality of the offensive line. I can rate the quarterbacks and the receivers, including that. And because my game engines use NFL averages over history, sack percentages over the history of the game, I'm only modifying whether a defense might cause more sacks or cause more interceptions or whatever the chart says. So I'm tweaking up sack percentage for a defensive line, or I'm tweaking up interception percentage for a particular style of defense. So how it affects play, right? The offensive line, on the other hand, would stonewall that. If they had a great offensive line, they would stonewall that DL and shifting the ball. So that's how OL used to affect the game. The problem was I realized I don't need that. I only need to recognize that the only thing we have in football history are raw numbers. So one thing's for sure, when I go back and I look at Neff Cohen and Korch, or even Pro Football Reference might be collecting more data now, I don't know. But when I go back to Pro Football Reference and I look up 1947 AAFC, I'm going to have points for, points against. I'm going to have raw numbers, attempts, completions, yards, interceptions, touchdowns. That's it. And then they're going to have rushing stats. So those quarterbacks are going to have rushing stats. The guy carried the ball 112 times for 300 yards. Because when they were sacked, that was considered a rush, right? They didn't even call it tackled while attempting to pass. So we have zero idea of what sacks were. So because football statistics have been so inconsistent through its history, now in the modern era with analytics and all this other special data, the NFL's doing more and collecting lots more data, and they're breaking that data down differently. But when I my games are designed to create your own fictional teams and players. So the offensive line is just factored. If you roll a +2 backfield, you can assume you have a damn good offensive line, right? It's subjective and it's narrative. Or when they get a big breakaway, I could give that to my offensive. I could say, oh, my offensive line made a huge hole there, and that was awesome. But all that matters is the +2 positively impacting the quality of the rushing, or a -2 backfield negatively impacting the quality of the rushing. So I could call it running. I mean, if I could rate it, my quarterback rating, my run the ball rating, and my pass the ball rating. So I could have broken it down into how well the team passes the ball, runs the ball, and receives the ball instead of calling them backs and receivers. But I want people to be thinking these are players on the field instead of just like Pater, everything. There's no allusion to actual players. Pater is all factored into those brilliant data numbers for their statistical performance. It just uses raw data to create those amazing charts. And we don't ever look at the right receiver, or the halfback or the fullback, etc. Right. So when I see games like Status Pro, which I grew up playing, I love Status Pro. I knew they had some way of giving those offensive linemen and defensive linemen credit, right? On defense, they would have tackles. They would have tackles for loss. They would have sacks. They would have interceptions, right? But outside of that, so much of it was guesswork because the NFL didn't tell you that linebacker or a linebacker might have 6 pass defends. So you might know, well, at least this linebacker broke up 6 passes and he led the league in pass breakups. So whoever was making players for Status Pro might have a formula in which that guy gets a -3 in pass coverage, man-to-man pass coverage. I don't know how Status Pro rated its players individually. I can only guess he had a formula for all of that stuff based on some statistical indicator. I doubt they subjectively just rated, Lester Hayes to be a +1 with an interception rating of, 40 to 48. So I assume, okay, he's 8 interceptions, but he's a +1 coverage guy. Well, Lester Hayes was never that bad, but not bad, but a plus. Rarely was Lester Hayes ever a plus value. He was negative, and he had an interception rating that was dang good. But that was it. We didn't have tackle. We didn't have run stop ratings for defensive backs in Status Pro. So the argument is, where would we stop, right? Well, if I have so I rate my offensive line in in Stratomatic, for instance, this guy's a 6. Yeah, but what about blocking inside? What about blocking outside? So for the guy who says I want offensive line, but then I would beg to say, yeah, but why stop there? Why don't you have them have a rating for outside blocking and inside blocking, line pledge blocking, and draw play blocking? And so we know, people who know the history of football know there are no legitimate official offensive line statistics, and there never have been. There are some database companies out there that are compiling what data they can get, and I'm not certain what analytics they're using to decide whether Joe Thomas gave up a sack or not. I don't know how they decide whether he wins at the line of scrimmage. I know coaches, when they scrutinize film, coaches have a scoring algorithm that coaches do when they're grading their players. Did he do what he was supposed to do on this play? Well, there is no statistician. And when I covered high school sports and I sat in the press box, and I would have to, so when we covered high school sports, when I was writing for the Gazette and I had to cover a high school game, so I'd be sent to a game, I'd be assigned a game. I'd get in my car like as a reporter, and I would travel to the site, whether it was in Denver or Pueblo or wherever, to cover the Mitchell Marauders. That was my local town. That might have been the team I was assigned to in Colorado Springs. And so for that weekend, right, it was always different. And I would have to drive to Denver to cover Mitchell versus Denver's team, right? And so I'd sit in the press box. Well, my responsibility was to also track the statistics for that high school team, not for the Denver team. I only had to track for our local team. And so every reporter had to track stats, right? So then we'd come together at the end of the week and we'd get all the stats and we compile all the stats together in our conference leaders. So I think there were 6 or 7 of us high school writers that would cover our high school sports, right? And if you didn't go to a game, because we couldn't cover every game, you would call at the end of the night, you would call the coach and you would ask the coach for the stats. And the coach usually had a stat keeper. And it was one of the students that had to keep stats. And he would give you the phone, you know, like Sheila recorded the stats for Mitchell. And I would talk to Sheila and Sheila would give me the numbers, right? And she would record them in the game if we weren't there to see it. My point is this, there, that was official. That was as official as it was going to get for the newspaper. Now, the CHSAA, the Colorado High School Academic Association, whatever, CHSAA Sports, might have some other way of doing it now, but literally we compiled the stats for our local high school teams, right? As the newspaper. And so we'd post box scores, and we would post I don't know, every couple of weeks we'd post who's leading in the city, who was leading and rushing and passing, etc. And at the end of the year, all the writers would get together and vote Player of the Year, right, for the Gazette Telegraph, right? But it was just our newspaper and largest newspaper in Southern Colorado, right? So, and we trusted all the stats we were getting for Colorado from the Denver papers, etc. So it gives you an idea, right? If I'm tracking the stats for the game I'm watching, and I could be off 2 or 3 yards, right? Because I'm in the press box with or without binoculars, and I'm watching the game and I'm writing about it, but I'm also tracking the stats. Numbers at 22, number 22 looks like he got 5 yards, carry for 22, 5 yards, right? And so I would tabulate the stats, right? I track the stats. Uh, was there a chance that you can make mistakes, or any writer could make mistakes, or attribute a run or a sack against the quarterback? So imagine if you were trusting even professional stat keepers to decide whether that sack was on the left tackle or the left guard, or a missed block by the quarter, by the fullback in pass pro, right? So I hear this a lot. Replayers, for instance, I've talked about this before. I'm not a replayer because I don't believe the games are accurate enough to warrant pretending that I'm doing serious replays. I want authenticity, and I want to see the best representation of the 1983 Raiders against the 1983 Washington Redskins. And I'm going to trust the Status Pro as an algorithm that, based on their engine, that allows me to have a pretty accurate representation of the Raiders versus the Redskins. But it's going to be based on that game engine, that algorithm for Status Pro football, right? I'm going to trust that Stratomatic, same, right? I'm going to trust the Second Season, same. Um, QuickDecks football, same, right? These I would call these simulators. These are big time football games that include individual ratings and all those bells and whistles. But the engine may or may not require that they know everything about offensive linemen. The engine may include an offensive line modifier, right? I'm trying to think of what's the game. Season ticket football has an offensive line modifier. They don't try to rate your left tackle, your right guard, your center, et cetera, et cetera. They have an offensive line modifier. That's called them. Grid Zone has a brilliant OL unit call ups. So once in a great while, the charts will say, what is the OL unit versus the DL unit? And you go, oh, my offensive line is a unit. And of course, every offensive lineman in Grid Zone is rated. But again, Grid Zone is a fictional football sport, and it's fictional players. And they're rated based on what you create when you roll them up, or whatever Gary sells in his pre-made fictional leagues, etc. When I invented Flash Football, same problem, right? When I invented Flash Football in 1990, I started working on it in 95, 96. Excuse me, in, yeah, 94. I copywrote it in 97, and I was selling it by 2000, 2001. It was ready and I was selling it. Um, I went into that same thing that you're going, how do I represent OL? Well, I have an intangibles rating, and that intangibles rating represents the coaching staff, offensive linemen, but also, again, same thing, the running back quality is accounted for in the offensive line is accounted for in the quality of the running back ratings. So you're not going to see a team with a 2,000-yard back that had a bad offensive line. You're just not. So when somebody says to me, "Yeah, but your OL should make a factor," well, I'm playing Barry Sanders in Strata. I'm playing Barry Sanders in elementary Stratomatic. An elementary version Stratomatic never looks at the offensive line ever, right? Because you use the elementary defense and you use Barry Sanders when it comes up on offense, and it's accurate. Again, showing that Barry Sanders represents the entire Detroit Lions offense. When he touches the ball, that's going to include the offensive line in those numbers. Um, there, people would argue, wow, what if Barry Sanders had been behind that Emmitt Smith offensive line? Well, sure, you could argue, wow, maybe Barry would have been truly untouchable. But you could also argue, well, maybe Barry wouldn't have been so because he was not one to just follow a blocker, right? Barry Sanders was a different kind of runner, right? So, but this is my point. It's all subjective. I mean, how do you rate? I can statistically hope that when they value Marcus Allen's inside run ability versus outside run ability, that they use some data between the guards to tell me, oh, Marcus Allen ran between the tackles, 242 times for 500 yards. He averaged 3 point something yards a carry. But when Allen went outside the tackles, he averaged, 200 times for 1,000 yards, right? Okay, I would expect the game to do that. But if you don't have that data, that is fraudulent. It's subjective, right? So I think the best football games are the ones that get the game right and they get the representation of those teams correct based on the engine they're using. And yes, as a designer, you could factor in the left tackle and some factor if you want to. My game was so simple. I realized the offensive line, it's 20 data points, possibly 40 with a second roll that just indicates yet true or false. And then the rating just tweaks the game slightly. So my game is so quick and so simple. The adding yet another variable, which I did do, but I decided it was redundant. Redundant's the word I'm looking for, right? So the problem is Stratomatic offensive line, and you don't need it for the elementary edition, which is how I play Stratomatic. That tells me that the offensive line is redundant with when you're looking at the running backs cards and the defensive elementary defensive cards. Where they become relevant is when we're playing the advanced version or the super advanced version. And now we're going to call up the left tackle versus the whatever, right? We're gonna look at the left tackle because the cards dictate that when I run a line plunge, we're going to look at the left guard or whatever. And then we look at that rating, and that's going to tell us significantly something. But Stratomatic works perfectly without that. So that tells me that it's redundant, right? Stratomatic could throw out their advanced rules, all their advanced features, and Stratomatic would be a great tabletop football game, just very basic, taking away some of the head-to-head joy, right? So the advanced version of Stratomatic for me is really head-to-head chess match, right? Where you want to be able to say, I'm taking advantage of his DT. I've got a left side that's 2 6s, dude. I'm running left. And he's going to want to put players on that side. Right now, I've created a weak spot on his opposite side, and I've still got a 6 right tackle. So I'm going left, left, left. But when I need it, I might go right because I still have a 6 right tackle, and he's had to cheat his linebackers over, right? That becomes this amazing coaching chess match. Well, when I play solitaire, there's no such thing, right? When I play solitaire, there is no chess match against myself. There's no chess match against a random die roll. I'm not going to do it. So I just let the dice call the plays, or I'll call the plays in Stratomatic, but I'll let the defense be decided randomly or based on what they would call in an obvious situation. Running situation, I'll probably just say they call a run defense, right? Make it fair for the opponent. So my point is, so for me, what is a replay game? A replay game takes you out of the equation. And years ago, when I invented Flash Football and I sent copies out to be reviewed by people in the greater community, and I got a lot of positive feedback. But the one thing I got from everybody who reviewed my game is your game is not a replay game. And I was scratching my head because I didn't know what a replay game was. I just designed a tabletop football game like Status Pro, it was just different. And until I talked to Richard Hanna, because I had said, "Hey, Richard, would you be willing to make my game a computer game?" And Richard Hanna said, "No, I only do chart and dice replay games." And I thought, okay, somebody needs to tell me what you mean by replay, because again, I had been playing Status Pro as a kid, paid it as a kid, but I didn't know what a replay was. And I learned at 27 years old or whatever I was at the time, 30, I think I was 30 at the time. I finally learned what replay meant to Richard Hanna and Terry Goodchild, and that is accurate, historically accurate results derived from ratings, team rating matchups, but you just roll the dice to get those numbers. You don't impact play necessarily by calling plays. So Terry Goodchild's soccer game, which were based on real teams' accuracy, they would have dice and charts. You would match up the grades, match up the ratings, and you would roll dice and find out what happened. You didn't decide when to kick a shot at the goal line. You didn't decide when to shoot the puck at the net, etc. So if any of you have played Status Pro basketball, you'll know what I'm talking about. I can decide you can pass the ball so many times and then you have to shoot, but you could also choose to shoot on the first card, right? So Status Pro basketball was one of those games where I could choose when I wanted a player to shoot, or I could pass a maximum number of times before I had to shoot or before there would be a 24-second clock violation. So in Status Pro basketball, the fact that I could manipulate when I wanted to shoot or how long I wanted to hold the ball, that was cool. That was clever in the fact that I could eat clock, right? For the 76ers against the fast break Lakers, I would want to come down and slow the game down. So I'd want to pass the ball twice before having to shoot with whoever ended up with the ball to kind of eat clock, because the Lakers, the 1970 whatever Lakers team that was, would just kill you in fast break play. So, but when I played the Nuggets, I would do a lot of stop and pop, right? So I would get the inbound ball, and then the very next card, whoever got it, I was shooting from the perimeter, right? So I was doing a lot of stop and pop play when I was playing the Nuggets in Status Pro basketball. So depending on the team and their outside shooting and whether they had great guards that could shoot from the outside, you get my point. That made Status Pro feel like I was on the court. I was the point guard, and I was making decisions strategically to even who shot or who passed the ball, which was amazing. I love Status Pro basketball. And I had played Status Pro basketball before I played Status Pro football. So when I learned there was a football game like Status Pro basketball, I almost killed myself, begging my father to drive me to the game store to buy this thing, this box that was this deep, and packed full of 2,500 football players, it had every offensive lineman, and we had never seen anything like it. We'd been playing pay dirt and Status Pro basketball. Later, a friend got Status Pro baseball, which he loved. He's a huge baseball fan, Jeff. Jeff played the shit out of Status Pro baseball solitaire. I just wasn't a baseball guy, so I just couldn't get into it. And I really didn't know what the hell I was doing, so it was easy to beat my ass in baseball game, right? Because I didn't know who these teams were. I didn't know who these players were. I was not a baseball guy. And of course, then Title Bout came along, Avalon Hill with the fast action cards, right? And so I went from pay dirt dice to everything being fast action decks, Status Pro basketball, Status Pro football, Status Pro boxing. I mean, to pay dirt. So, and we had never seen Stratomatic football until we were in the 2000s when I first found, I think, the 1996 version of Status Pro football. I mean, Stratomatic football. And I went, oh shit, dice, 2 dice 6. This is amazing. But we had never seen it as kids. So we weren't playing dice-based sports games outside of Bowl Bound and Pay Dirt at the time, right? And so that's kind of, and then football strategy, which uses no dice. It's a chess match, it's rock paper scissors. I'm gonna call this, thinking he's gonna call this, and I'm gonna get 6 yards, right? I'm gonna catch him in that defense again and get that touchdown on the sideline pass. And yep, caught him, touchdown. It was literally a matchup game, right? He calls a defense, I call an offense, we match it up, and that becomes this literally a game of chicken, so to speak, right? Which was great until you realize that you know each other too well, and there's no random chance to even the odds when you're caught in the wrong defense. So football strategy, I played a lot more with my older brother than I played with my buddies because we wanted to play our favorite teams, and strategy had no teams. You had strategy cards. I want to play the Smash Mouth team, so I would take the Smash Mouth card, and I was trying to get as much running as I could. Well, my brother wasn't stupid. He knew, hey man, he's using the Smash Mouth card. I'm gonna try to stop his runs. I might catch him then in some pop passes, etc. But after about 10 games against my brother, we knew each other so well, they became very stalemate games, right? So that was a great game, but, right, there was no random chance until you rolled for a field goal or a PAT, I think, right? I haven't seen football strategy in 30 years, so don't hold me to all that detail. My point is, Pater uses stats and data to make these accurate historical cards. And on the flip side, the defense, right? Bowl bound, data-driven football, it's called now, which is amazing recreation of Pater, which is really was my first love before Status Pro basketball, etc. But to get to your point, why don't I rate the OL? Because it's subjective and because there's no reliable data. There is. It's called how well a team runs the ball in total yardage, what their average per carry is, and how many touchdowns they got. And on the passing side, how many times was their quarterback sacked? How many times, that's the only data we have in history that's fairly consistent. They may have even sacks. They didn't start adding sacks until what, post 1982, I think, were they tracking stats, something officially tracking stats, sacks. So that's my long answer to that. Status Pro football, how they did it, obviously they did it with an algorithm rating them probably based on yardage and based on reputation, whether they were all pros. I don't know. I'm speaking out of turn here. I couldn't tell you how the gentleman who designed the Status Pro teams and assigned values to those offensive linemen, but I will trust that it was based on something other than guesswork. I think their left tackle must have been good. Give him 4 points. No, I'm sure it was based on whether they made the Pro Bowl and it was based on reputation, right? Because there were no statistics, right? Obviously, when you played a team that had 2,500 yards rushing in Status Pro, and your backs, you knew the backs were remarkable because they have this data attached to them. Herschel Walker had, whatever, and he averaged 5 point, or whoever, I'm trying to think who it was. Well, Marcus Allen in 1982. I'm trying to think who led the league in 82. Because 82 was a strike season. The point is, you can look at the card and say, oh, yeah, I can see his average here. And you can look at their offensive line and wonder, huh, so like San Diego might have a back that was rated pretty good, but their offensive line might be kind of gappy. I don't know how they did that because there was no actual official data to rate offensive linemen. So that had to be somewhat subjective, right? And same with my first version of Big Country Football. I had OL rating, but again, with only 20 results there, it became this kind of redundant tripping point that I thought it'd be just simple to eliminate it. And the offensive line is accounted for in the back rating and the quarter and the on the charts in the defensive line sack rating. So yeah, the OL in my game is accounted for in the averages. The charts are NFL averages, and they're accounted for in the back rating, right? So yeah, my OL is pretty abstract in my games, Flash football and in BCF. And I talk about those two games in particular because those are full football simulators. You play every snap of the game. But in both of those, the offensive line is assumed in the engine. It's just assumed in the engine to be at least NFL average. And then there'll be times where you could make some assumptions when there's a big run that the OL may have played a role in that. Or, at the end of the year, when you collect stats for my fictional teams and your team was sacked 62 times, you can say your offensive line sucked, right? But there's not much you can do about it in the offseason except hope next year you roll less sacks against your team, right? So you're really creating football. So in my games, you're actually playing to create football. You're not playing to recreate football. You're not playing to replay football. You're not playing to see how close it is to the real thing. My games are saying make teams and play and find out. So again, we use a term in role playing. Many of my colleagues, we all share a similar attitude about role playing. Not everybody does. I'm just talking about my little clique of role playing. Play to find out. You want to play the game and roll the dice to find out. The dice will tell us the truth, right? So in my games, the dice dictate the truth, and the ratings can impact the quality of that truth, or can, in sometimes in big swings, sometimes in minuscule swings over long term. So, all right, I think I've explained that more so than I needed to, but to answer your question, because there's no official data. So if I make the 1985 season, where am I going to get offensive line stats? Well, there's only one place I can even gauge the offensive line. Games played, games started, whether a guy made the Pro Bowl, whether he made the All Pro, right? But outside of that, I'm looking at Chicago Bears raw rushing ratings: 2,700 yards rushing, 5 yards a carry, 27 touchdowns. Holy shit, that was like number one in the league. This offensive line must have been pretty badass, right, for the Chicago Bears. Walter Payton had 1,800 yards. They went to the Super Bowl. They won it all. Out of that 1,800 yards, there's 27. He got 1,800 out of 2,700. That tells me they blocked well enough that every back did well. So I could make some subjective understanding of that offensive line was pretty badass when they ran the ball. But exactly how good Jimbo Covert was versus I can't think of the other lineman there, the left tackle, right guard, whatever. But you get my point. So when Stratomatic rates those guys, ask yourself, where did they get the data to rate them? Because they're either guessing or you hope it's based on some algorithm, because you can play the elementary version of Stratomatic and there is no offensive line represented in the elementary version. And statistically, Barry Sanders, Walter Payton, they still play great. Sacks still play pretty well, right? So you have to ask yourself, where is Stratomatic getting those numbers? And the fact that they can just disregard them to play the elementary game, which is still accurate, says how redundant is this data? How relevant is this data, right? Not every game does that, but Stratomatic is a special kind of game. Here's a game that has it or literally throws it out. Pick whatever game you want to play, elementary or advanced. Advanced pulls them into play. Elementary ignores them completely, right? So there's an example of a game that works beautifully both ways. My game, I did have them, took them out. I could add them back. For those sticklers that say I think every team should have a representation of offensive line, that is an opinion and it's a valid opinion. But as designing my own games, I'm choosing to leave offensive linemen out of the actual game mechanics. They're not out of the equation. They're factored into the value on the charts. They're factored into the running backs value, right? When I rate historical teams, when you make up random teams and you create teams for your fictional leagues, they're factored in if you want to. But when I sit down to make a historical season for it, they are accounted for in the data that I use to create the ratings, right? If that makes sense. But I don't attempt to decide what the right guard of the 1976 Falcons is worth to those numbers. And if I did, let's not kid ourselves. There's a lot of history. There's a lot of players who played in a lot of games. I would be lying to say it would not be guesswork or subjective when you get to those obscure players and those obscure teams. If I just said, hey, this guy only played 6 games in his career for the Falcons and I gave him the worst rating I could, how do we know in those 6 games he wasn't phenomenal? Right? And I screwed him because, well, he just doesn't have enough data. I'm just going to give him a -2. So that's subjective. And I have to ask, I don't know, again, how they rated him for Status Pro Football. I don't know how Stratomatic derives their ratings. I don't know how other games derive their ratings. I know from second season in his team creation booklet, you assign points and they recommend where you should assign the points. So you get an inkling of how you grade the offensive line for second season football by Keith Avalone, play.com. So that's pretty cool. So you can kind of gear, oh, I see if I'm making teams based on actual numbers, I can assign points to my offensive line. And then, but again, it's somewhat subjective. If I'm not certain how good the Raider line was in 1963, right? Other than Jim Otto and Gene Upshaw might have been there then. I can't remember, but maybe it was Jim Otto. So Otto I know is a Hall of Famer. I'm going to give the guy most of the points I can, right? But then the rest of those Raiders of '62, I'm not certain. I'm going to make them at least average or better than average. Well, the '62 Raiders maybe not. I can't remember. I think the '62 Raiders were crap, but they had a decent running game, right? Okay, I'm done. But to answer your question, because it is the only way that when I make my games, I use NFL historical averages for the engine. And then I have ratings that tweak the engine. That's how I do it. Okay. As opposed to say Stratomatic that rates the cards, individual cards. So Barry Sanders is rated to affect the engine, literally. There's not a universal engine that Barry affects. Barry is the engine. Appa football, there's an engine, and then the card points to the engine. Stratomatic, there is no universal engine. There is Barry Sanders, Emmitt Smith, all backs have their own engine, right? Second season has a universal engine, and the ratings are used to direct results, right? My games, Flash Football has an engine. My ratings affect yardage yield, right? In Flash Football. So all my ratings in my game affect the yardage yield of the engine, right? BCF, it's a universal probabilities of pro football. My ratings affect those charts, right? So I'm creating teams and values that affect the universal charts. Gary Brown's game does this, right? The ratings affect this universal football universe of charts, right? Status Pro has a game engine, but every card has its own units, right? Every quarterback's rated a particular way, and the fast action card numbers point through those engines of Dan Marino, the engine of Marcus Allen, right? So all these games do things slightly differently, right? One of my all-time favorites of late, Play Action Football, that I just got from Clark and Addison Game Company at the end of last year, the very end of 2024. Love it. That's universal charts, but those charts are for that season, right? The averages of the universal NFL for that year. And then his teams have a number that modifies those results, right? And that's how his game works. So the most common is a universal set of football charts because we control the quality of a realistic football. And then you have the teams impact those charts. Stratomatic, every player is his own chart, right? So that's where Stratomatic is truly unique there, right? There is no universal running chart. Every back is his own chart, which is very cool. It makes every card in the Stratomatic set truly unique, right? Baseball players know this when they do their drafts for Stratomatic baseball, that Barry Bonds card is unique, right? And that makes Stratomatic really a special card collecting game. It really, if you think about it, right? Okay. All right. I'm gonna shut up now. Everybody have a wonderful week. Bye bye. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.